by research shows that cold plunges every once in a while, the stimulation of cold seems to do that. Now, why would that be? You can think about this teleologically. If you're living in one part of the world and you go to a colder part of the world, your body is going to adapt to that by producing more brown fat, trying to make you warmer so that you don't have to bundle up as much. How would this be stimulated? By subjecting your body to cold temperatures.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to have Dr. Seheult on the podcast with us. He is a quadruple board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary diseases, critical care medicine, and sleep medicine through the American Board of Internal Medicine. But he's also, in my discussions with him so far, sounds very holistic, very much into doing things and different things that we'll talk about today where people can heal themselves naturally. So we'll talk a little bit about that. In 2012, he co-founded MedCram, which is a medical education company with CME accredited videos that are utilized by hospitals, medical schools, and hundreds of thousands of medical professionals from all over the world. He has over 1 million YouTube subscribers already. And so he's been training hospitals, medical schools, and medical professionals. And now he's also making a lot of this great information available to the general public. So thank you for joining us here today.
Talora, it's really good to be here. Really good to be on Peak Performance Life. So thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's our pleasure. So let's jump right into it. Let's give a little bit about your background and how you became interested in what you're focusing on today.
Great. Yeah. So I went to medical school. I decided late that I wanted to be a lung doctor, which means I had to be board certified in internal medicine and then pulmonary diseases. Then part of what you do as a pulmonologist is you work in the ICU. So I do critical care medicine. I see a lot of the downstream events of not living a healthy life and the types of diseases that you can get when that happens. And I'm also a sleep specialist as well. So I've delved into sleep and I'm board certified by the ABIM in that as well. And that's how things were for a while. I was practicing medicine. I was really interested in teaching. So we set up this MedCram website to educate other healthcare providers and explain things. A lot of things were going on at the time. They want a lot more physicians. Medical schools were popping up. And maybe the quality of teaching wasn't so good. And so there was a need to explain things clearly rather than just reading PowerPoint presentations. Anyhow, this is where we were on December of 2019. And of course, it hit. COVID-19 hit, and that was a watershed moment. There was a lot of people now, not just healthcare providers, that wanted information, reliable information about what they could do. And so we dedicated our MedCram channel not only to educating providers on the mundane medical aspects of life, but we started to do a new series on COVID. And so we could train healthcare professionals about what to do, early treatment, what we could do in terms of the hospital, how to ventilate patients. And we've used that as a platform, and there's been a huge demand for understanding our body now, how we can protect ourselves from getting viral infections. And that's really been a lot of what I do. I still do the old videos where we talk about how to treat congestive heart failure, how we treat asthma, COPD. But part of my passion now is understanding things that are very easily obtainable, things that don't need a prescription, things that you don't need to necessarily see a doctor for. And I'm not saying that these should be done in isolation, right? But things that you can do on your own and take control of your own healthcare so that you can be a more healthy human being and not be as susceptible to these viruses. It's not 100%, but you want to tilt that scale as much as you can.
Yeah, no question. The stronger your immune system is, the healthier you are, the better you'll be able to fight off any potential viruses and things of that nature. So I guess let's just jump right into what are some of these things that you've kind of seen that people can do without a prescription.
Yeah, so this is actually more of a philosophical discussion up front. There's this idea of hormesis. Hormesis is this idea that small changes in your environment in one extreme or other extreme direction can actually induce changes in your body that will help protect you against other diseases down in the future. They're like mini stress tests. Let me give you some example of this. People know that there is a benefit, we'll get into this, of intermittent fasting. Well, this is kind of how things were before we had a lot of technology. Back many years ago, the human race had to deal with famines and people would eat less. This kind of was a protection in some ways. We'll talk about the science of how that is. Sometimes it gets cold. Sometimes it gets hot. These are the sorts of things that technology over and over many years has sort of hedged us in from those extremes. We now live in a climate controlled house. We're excluded from the elements. We don't get as much sun. We go to our garage, get into our car, drive to our work, go from the underground parking structure up to our office, which is climate controlled, and so forth. You note the idea that I'm getting here. And so what you'll see is a common theme. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, hopefully we'll get to all of them, but sunlight, exercise, intermittent fasting, hydrotherapy, these are all things that we can do to the body that are very low cost and very low tech, but actually have shown through modern science to have a pretty large benefit, pretty large impact. And the first place I like to start is sunlight. This is a big topic. This is something that really got my interest during the pandemic, partly because I started looking at how we started treating people with the flu 100 years ago. And of course, we didn't have antibiotics at that time. We didn't even have vaccines. And there was this one article that I read by Dr. Wells Rubel that was in a publication, it wasn't even in a journal, where they compared to what they were doing in the sanitariums at the time in New England in 1918, 1919, to what they were doing in the army hospitals. Now, they had just gotten aspirin. That was invented in 1899. And the army hospitals were using aspirin liberally. And unfortunately, they were experiencing a pretty high mortality rate during the flu. But over in the sanitariums, and these were run by the Adventists in the Northeast, they were taking a much more holistic approach. They were looking at hydrotherapy, which we'll talk about. They were looking at sun exposure, rest. They had a fraction of the hospital mortality rates than the army hospitals were getting. And I started to look into what they were doing. They were doing sunlight exposure. So I started to look into that. And modern research coming from a different angle is now telling us about the benefits of near infrared radiation on the body. So let's pause right there and let's sort of break down what it is that I'm talking about. We know the benefits of sunlight in terms of mental health. We know that people who are exposed to sunlight have less depression. I'm not talking about that. We know that people who live in climates where there's more sun have better circadian rhythms. I'm not talking about that either. What I'm about to talk about is something that you probably haven't been aware of, and that is that sunlight itself can actually stimulate mitochondria in your cells pretty deep within your body to actually produce ATP and melatonin, is what they're suggesting, that can actually be very beneficial to your cells and also your metabolism. So when you look at sunlight, there's a very wide spectrum of light. There's the infrared spectrum, which is more than 50% of the energy from the sun. And then there's the visible spectrum, which we can actually see. And then a small spectrum of that is ultraviolet radiation. That's what we now know is responsible for making vitamin D in your skin. It's good that it's in your skin because ultraviolet light is not able to penetrate very deeply. Conversely, near infrared radiation and infrared in general is able to penetrate very deeply into your skin. In fact, some studies say up to 8 centimeters. There's a astrophysicist by the name of Dr. Robert Fosbury who just emailed me a couple of days ago a picture of him with his hand. If you actually search this on the internet, you'll find it on our Twitter feed. It shows a near infrared light behind his hand and a photograph taken with a near infrared filter. And it shows literally that his hand is completely lit up. The light is passing through the skin, through the bones, coming out the other side. And the only thing that you can see are the veins because they're absorbing the near infrared light. The point is that near infrared light can penetrate skin, bone, and go deep within our body. So what does it do? Why is it there, and what's the purpose of it going that deep? By the way, it could also penetrate through clothes, obviously. So you can get the benefit of the sunlight, even if you cover up and you go outside. If you're worried about melanoma or you're worried about skin cancer, that's another topic.
That's interesting.
But the point is that
I'd never heard that before. That's very interesting. You even if you're wearing your clothes, you can still, wow.
Absolutely. And this is the key point is the key is not necessarily going into the sun directly, but being outside. I'll just mention, since we're talking about the environment, is that leaves from trees and green grass are highly reflective of near infrared radiation. So what does that mean? If you're outside in a city, for instance, that doesn't have a lot of grass or trees, you're not going to get as much infrared radiation there as you would, for instance, if you're out in a forest or you're in an area with a lot of greenery, okay? And we know for a fact, there's been studies that people who live in green spaces are actually healthier in terms of diabetes and cardiovascular risk. This may be one of the reasons, as we'll explain here. So the near infrared radiation goes in deep, and we believe, based on research, that there are receptors in the mitochondria that accept this near infrared light and turn up the energy production in the mitochondria. That's the purpose of the mitochondria, is to increase ATP production. Not only that, it also produces a substance called melatonin. Now let's just stop right there. A lot of people will say, melatonin, that's the hormone of sleep. That's secreted from the brain. It happens right before you go to sleep. All of that is true. But that melatonin is actually picked up in the bloodstream. The melatonin that I'm about to talk about here from the near infrared light stays in the mitochondria. It's not found in the blood. And what they're showing is that melatonin is an extremely powerful antioxidant. Now, why would that be important? That's important because the chemical reactions that are going on in the mitochondria that allow you to make energy, unfortunately, as a byproduct, create something called reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress. Now, oxidative stress is the common denominator that I believe, if we look at the data, is the reason, for instance, why people with COVID die, is because they have excess oxidative stress. What are diseases that have oxidative stress? Obesity increases your oxidative stress. Age increases your oxidative stress. Diabetes increases your oxidative stress. And there's a whole host of other diseases that are tied to dysfunctional mitochondria, diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, even autism has been tied and linked to mitochondrial disease. So what they're saying here is that mitochondria, for them to operate efficiently and better, require occasional stimulation from near infrared radiation, okay? Think about it like this. Think about that the mitochondria are like a car in the engine, okay? Or engine in the car, like an ICE one, right? So like the combustible engine. You know that if you run that car, that engine is going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. That's oxidative stress. Melatonin is like the cooling system that allows the engine to run more smoothly and cool and not burn out as you're going up the hill. Okay. So that's what is needed. Even though it's a warm sunlight that's coming in, it's actually cooling down the mitochondria. Now, here's the problem that we have in the West or in the first world countries. We spend 93% of our lives inside. Yeah. The windows that we put on our homes are specifically designed not to allow infrared radiation in. Why? Because infrared radiation warms up the house, and you're gonna have to spend more money with air conditioning, cooling it down. So if you're inside, you're not getting any near infrared radiation. And the last bit of this is the light bulbs. The lights that we used to turn on in our house, they were incandescent bulbs. Those gave off tremendous infrared radiation. In fact, most of the energy was spent on energy that you couldn't even see. And so what did they do? They said, we can make this more energy efficient. And they made LED bulbs, which only give off in the visible spectrum. And we don't know the health benefits, because human beings have not been exposed prior to this point to light only in the visible spectrum and no light in any other spectrum. That's exactly what we're doing with LED bulbs. So when you go into a house now, into a modern home with LED bulbs and low E glass, your exposure to near infrared light is essentially zero. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you can already see here where I'm going with this. If we are living in countries that are modernized, we may be trapped within our own technology. If you look at, for instance, what happened during COVID-19, we had many countries that were not as advanced as ours, and yet they did not suffer as much damage in terms of mortality as we did. We had about an eighth of the population, or we're 4% of the population of the world, I believe, and we had 25% of the cases, if I remember correctly. So And that's very easily tiable. We know that COVID-19 makes the person that it's infecting have more oxidative stress. We know that that the ACE2 receptor, which gets knocked out with SARS-CoV-2 infection, is something that is regulating oxidative balance. So if you knock that out, the patient becomes more stressed with oxidative stress, et cetera. So I became very excited about this, and I started to look, and people started to understand this more. There was a study, a randomized placebo-controlled trial that was done in Brazil, where they took COVID patients and put an LED jacket on them. This was a jacket that they put on, and the bulbs lit up with, I think it was 940 nanometer wavelength, which is precisely right in the near-infrared spectrum. And to make a long story short, at the end of this study, statistically significant with only 30 subjects, and there was dramatic differences. They didn't power it for mortality, but dramatic differences in time in the hospital, their pulmonary function tests, their oxygenation, their white blood cell counts. They improved much faster. Now, obviously, we can't go down and buy these jackets because they were actually constructed for the trial, but we have access to the largest near infrared lamp in the solar system if you just go out on those days that have it. So I am a firm believer that we need to get outside more. If somebody is susceptible to getting burning or skin cancer, remember that most of that is coming from ultraviolet, which cannot penetrate through clothes. And so wearing a layer of clothing, but getting outside, I think is really important in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. A few things I definitely want to unpack from there as well. So people might be thinking, because it's interesting. That's a good point you made at the end, that you can, if you're afraid of getting burnt, because so many people have said, there are people saying don't get any sun these days, right? Like, you're going to burn, you're going to get. So, which I completely disagree with. I obviously like to get sunlight first thing in the morning as well, because from what I understand, it stimulates the melatonin later at night, helps you sleep and everything like that as well. So a few things. Any preference? Is there a specific time of day that's better than another time of day with regards to that? I got a few more questions I want to ask you on what you just said too, but let's start with that one.
Yeah, so the best time, if you are interested in getting maximal near infrared and minimal ultraviolet, the best time of day is at the extremes. So in the morning when the sun is coming up, and in the evening when the sun is coming down. When the sun is low in the sky, it has to penetrate through more atmosphere, and that atmosphere is going to protect you much more from ultraviolet rays. But because near infrared is so good at penetration, it's going to come through very easily. Obviously, you're going to get more near infrared at high noon, but you're going to get much more ultraviolet. So if that's something that's a concern to you, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., stay out of the sun. I would say, by the way, though, that if you are outside from sunrise to 10 a.m., you've gotten already a lot of near infrared that's going to protect you. It's building up melatonin. And so when the 10 to 2 comes, it's going to be protected from that onslaught of ultraviolet. And then from 2 o'clock till sunset, the near infrared is going to be helping repair any damage that might have happened. So actually the day of being outside, it's already built in that there's going to be protection against the damage and then repair.
Nice. Yeah, I love getting morning sunlight. It's one of the best things. I think people going for a walk, getting some sunlight in the morning is definitely one of the best things that they can do, no question. You also you talked a little bit about melatonin. So I know a lot of people immediately go to, so should I supplement with melatonin then because he said it's good. What is your? I mean, I think ideally we want, first step would be ideally they get the sunlight, natural sunlight, and achieve their melatonin that way. But what is your, especially as a sleep expert, what is your position on melatonin? Because I've heard a lot of different positions on it.
Yeah, excellent question. So I'll be evidence-based with this. I personally don't take melatonin. I sleep fine, but I could understand why someone would need it for sleep. There's two different types of melatonin that we're talking about here. There is the melatonin that everybody knows about. It's secreted from the pineal gland in the brain. It secretes it into the bloodstream, and it usually comes on right before you sleep. That type of melatonin can be supplemented from a tablet or a pill. The melatonin that I was talking about today is inside the cell, inside the mitochondria. And while melatonin in the blood can be pumped into there, it has to be more or less created there in the mitochondria. And so you cannot substitute the melatonin in the mitochondria. That's the cooling system. That's the antioxidant that protects from the reactive oxygen species. You cannot supplement that melatonin with any pill that you put in your mouth because they're in two different parts of the body. That being said, if we want to talk about taking melatonin at night, what I would recommend is that you only take melatonin about an hour or so before you want to go to sleep, because it does sort of signal the body that you're getting ready to go to sleep. And then the other thing that's interesting is that the more melatonin you take, the less effective it is. So I would not recommend going above 5 milligrams of melatonin. People who take more than 5.
A lot of supplements out there are 10 milligrams, or more, sometimes even more. Yeah. So it's good to know.
Yeah. So melatonin, less is better. The other thing I would also mention is make sure that the melatonin that you're sourcing is coming from a reputable brand that has a third party to make sure that what is in there is actually in there. So US Laboratories, for instance, is a reputable third party one. It's basically taking the place of the FDA, because none of this stuff is FDA approved, at least in the United States. Other countries, for instance, in Europe, melatonin is a prescription, is actually regulated. Here in the United States, it's considered a supplement, so it's not regulated. I just want to make sure that people, when they go buy this, are actually getting melatonin.
Yeah. Some really good distinctions there. Now, what about...
And it will say that on the bottle. It'll say it's third-party tested.
Right. Yep. I've actually stayed away at Peak Performance. We've stayed away from melatonin just because I don't personally take it. I usually like to come out with products that we actually believe in, and that, and so there's just been so much different opinions about it that I've just decided to stay away from it. And also so many different markets flooded with 10 milligrams, 2 milligrams, nobody knows what to take. So I think that's what you said. So 5 milligrams kind of at most per night, about 1 hour before bed.
Yeah.
That sounds, from a third party tested supplier. That's a great advice there. So what about the lighting in people's houses then? Like in your house, do you make a point of having all incandescent old school light bulbs, even though they take a little bit more energy?
It's a very good thought. I've had the same debate in my own mind. So before I knew all of this information, I really wanted to get my electric bill down. And so I changed all of my incandescent bulbs out to LED. And you know what? It worked. I mean, the bill went down. And now I'm realizing that that maybe this wasn't the most helpful thing to do. But on the other hand, I'm not depending on my interior lighting to give me the near infrared. So I'm trying to make a point of going outside and getting near infrared. Now, there might be other issues with LEDs that we haven't brought up to this point, but we can bring up briefly. LED lights have a flicker associated with them. It's your brain can't even see it with the naked eye, but there's questions about whether or not that flicker affects cognition, health, things of that nature. There are a couple of companies that realize this. One I was made aware of because one of our videos involves Scott Zimmerman, who is a light engineer, and he's also the head of NIRA, N-I-R-A. So that's he's actually dedicated on making a company that produces LED bulbs that have near infrared and don't flicker. Right now, it's sort of in the beginning processes, but you can check out him. He's just one of many different companies. I think at some point I would like to slowly replace my current modern LED bulbs to something better. But here's the point, though, that I think is more important than even that. It doesn't have to be expensive. What I think is more important than anything else is to make sure that lights are out by 9 o'clock. Now that's like, what did you just say? That's really hard to do. But if there's one thing that we know more than anything else in terms of just the regular science, and I'm a sleep specialist, so I see this, is that light exposure to your eyes after 9 o'clock is going to completely shut down melatonin production. It's going to get rid of the sleep that's actually the most beneficial. It's the sleep at the beginning of the night, which is slow wave sleep. It's the part of the sleep, by the way, that's associated with the growth hormone secretion, which is like the elixir of the fountain of youth. If there was a fountain of youth hormone ever, it's growth hormone. People used to grind up cow pancreas to get growth hormone, or pituitaries, I should say. You can get your own growth hormone. All you need to do is to go to bed relatively early, take some melatonin if you like, but no light exposure. And I'm talking even photons of light getting to the back of the retina is enough to signal the pineal gland to shut down. So if you have a bright room, or you have a street lights outside, or you've got clock radios in your room, or things that give off light, either taking care of those things or putting a patch over your eyes. That's the kind of darkness that we really need to have.
Yeah, like an eye mask, sleeping with an eye mask to shut out all light. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely try to black out my rooms as much as possible. And what about blue light blocking glasses? Are you a fan as well? If people have to be up at 9 p.m. and
Yeah, so I would say that the biggest offender at night is the blue light, but really it's any kind of light. So if you're doing a blue blocker at night, I think you're shifting it in your direction, but you completely eliminate that problem by just turning off the light. Now, blue light's gotten a bad rap. I think blue light in the daytime is actually very beneficial.
Right,
so I would not encourage people to wear blue blockers during the day. You want that blue light.
Yeah, and I've heard of now even like a lot of the prescription glasses that people get, they're like, oh, we're going to make it blue light blocking also. And it's like, wait a minute, if they're going to be wearing that all day during the day, that's not what you want. So yeah, another thing though, I do have these, I can't remember where I heard about it a long time ago, but I have, it's called, I think it's called Baby Bedtime Nighttime light bulb or something like that. It's like, I think for babies, but it's an incandescent light bulb that's a very low, I guess level of brightness or whatever it is. They cost like $20 or something per bulb on Amazon or whatever it was. But I just bought one for myself and in each of my daughter's bedrooms, so that at night, if they are turning on a light, at least it's this light and not, the LED light or something like that. So that's one thing we try to do.
I recommend highly that there be no lights or night lights at all in children's rooms. But if you have to turn a light on, like you said, do one that's in the reddish tins area toward that side of the spectrum and very low level. Here's the other thing too that I'd recommend is the photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that actually pick up this light are actually in the lower portion of our retina. Now, if you think about optics, if you've ever studied the eye, the image is inverted. So the bottom portion of our retina is actually picking up information in the top part of our visual field. And the bottom part of our visual field, obviously in the top part of our retina. The important aspect of that is to understand that where we ended up with these ganglion cells in the lower part of the retina is actually picking up light generally in the upper part of our visual field, which is exactly where the sun or the moon might be, right? So having lighting lower down is going to be beneficial because it's less likely going to stimulate those receptors if you have to turn it on. Of course, if you look down at it, it's going to change where it is, but having generally low lighting. And so I actually know people that are very up on this. They're experts, and they've basically turned their house at 9 o'clock. All the lights are dim. The only things that are on are floor lighting, so they can make their way around because they really believe in this aspect of health.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, and the night lights you mentioned as well. I hadn't thought about that, but I think a lot of people are tempted when their kids are young to have night lights, but it's probably not beneficial for their sleep to have those night lights in the room if they can avoid it. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So couple other things related to what you said again, and it's, I don't want to take away from the point you're making about how important sunlight is, but I also know when people hear infrared, they're like, oh, what about those infrared saunas? Are those good? What about those red light panels like that everyone's selling these days? All the biohackers are talking about. Any opinion on infrared saunas and the red light panels?
Yeah, I think that they have a very high potential for being beneficial. We just don't have the long-term data. So when we look at infrared saunas versus traditional saunas, obviously in Finland, which most of these studies come from, they use traditional saunas. So all of the data is coming from that. Infrared saunas, though, I think have the potential for being very beneficial. The lights have also a potential, and I think that more research needs to be done. We just don't have that solid research. The one potential aspect, though, that I think, obviously, if you're in a portion of the earth where you don't get a lot of sunlight, especially during the wintertime, then this may be something that you may be able to do. But the one aspect that I'm not sure how this is going to work out is that these lights and the saunas, they give off at very particular wavelengths because they're manufactured and the bulbs are manufactured in a specific way. Whereas if you have the option of going outside, there's a very broad spectrum of wavelength, and that might, we don't know this yet, but that might play a part that maybe for health purposes, you need not only stimulation at this wavelength, but also at this wavelength. Whereas if you're going into a sauna and getting one particular wavelength, it may not be the whole picture. I don't know. It's a potential. It's just hypothetical. I just don't know the answer to that.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Any other ways of hormesis that you like? I've heard hormesis used the wrong way. Like I've heard someone say one time, like, yeah, I'm just going to eat this huge, cake right now or something. And it's like hormesis, like, so I've heard it used kind of the wrong way, but I also, think that there's a lot of valid points to using it the right way. I do feel a huge difference. Like when I take a cold shower and I am going to get a cold plunge myself, I'm not going to go as crazy as some people trying to go down to 37 degrees. Some of my friends that had me get in theirs. But I think, a 47, 49 degrees is probably good enough. And even just taking cold shower, finishing my showers the last few minutes on a cold, I mean, I could feel a noticeable difference in, I think, even my recovery, but just mentally stimulating. Any opinion on cold plunging?
Well, I completely agree with you, and I agree the cold plunge. Hey, I just recently went to France and had a vacation there, and I went to a famous chateau called Chateau de Chenonceau. I'll tell you this story. It's kind of funny. It's the first evidence of cold plunge. So there was a mistress of the king named Diane de Poitiers, and she was 20 years older than the king, yet she caught the king's eye. And the question was, what was about this lady that caught the king's eye? And she did a number of things. She exercised. She was, very, did a lot of things. She was actually very, very beautiful. But one of the things that she did, and this Chateau Chenonceau is right over the River Cher, every single morning she would take a cold plunge in that River Cher. And so they believed that her cold, and this is in a society that basically never took a bath. Okay. They took a bath when they were born and when they died. That's basically the only times they took baths. But she, on a daily basis, would plunge into the River Cher. Now, do we know that that's the reason why she was so beautiful? We have no idea. But fortunately today, we have good evidence that cold plunges actually have a lot of benefit. They have a lot of benefit in terms of norepinephrine, dopamine, these sorts of things that are released from the body and can improve mood. But they also have improvement. They also show improvement in the ability to burn a fat. So there's two different types of fat. There's white fat, there's brown fat, and then there's this beige fat, which is kind of in the middle. It has nothing to do with the color of your skin. It has to do with the color of the cells. And the reason why it's more brown is because there's more mitochondria in there. There's less fat and more mitochondria. What does that mean? The more mitochondria allows more energy production, more short circuiting, which is good. And that causes heat. Well, if you're producing heat, that means you're burning energy. If you're burning energy, your basal metabolic rate goes up. So how do you get your basal metabolic rate to go up? It's by turning white fat into brown fat. And that brown fat is, by research, shows that cold plunges every once in a while, the stimulation of cold seems to do that. Now, why would that be? You can think about this teleologically. If you're living in one part of the world and you go to a colder part of the world, your body is going to adapt to that by producing more brown fat, trying to make you warmer so that you don't have to bundle up as much. How would this be stimulated? By subjecting your body to cold temperatures. We don't do that anymore. We go into a climate-controlled house, climate-controlled car, climate-controlled work. It's a bad thing to have to experience cold. Right? That was societal norm. Okay. You want to be warm all the time, and a sign of being, wealthy and well-to-do means you never have to experience cold. Well, as it turns out, it might be beneficial to actually experience cold every once in a while. So people go out and buy a cold plunge.
Yep.
So these things are now not planned. They're now planned, but that's okay. Still, it's beneficial to experience cold. On the flip side of things, and this sort of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is experiencing hot or heat, and that would be saunas or hydrotherapy. So what's hydrotherapy? Hydrotherapy is this idea of using moist heat And I say moist because water has a very high energy of enthalpy. It can deliver a lot of energy in a small amount. It takes a lot of energy to heat up water, but it also delivers a lot of energy. So you use moist heat to heat up the body, specifically the core body temperature, so that it can have effectual changes in the body. We'll talk about that. You do that for about 20 minutes, and then you switch quickly to cold. And what that has a tendency to do is to constrict the superficial blood vessels to lock that heat in so it doesn't dissipate. One of the ways of losing heat from your body is to vasodilate on the surface. That causes heat release. Well, if you heat up a body and then quickly constrict the surface blood vessels, that heat's going to stay locked in longer. And so this technique of hydrotherapy actually goes back over 100 years. We see evidence of it in societies. Hundreds of years ago, it was more formalized, for instance, by John Harvey Kellogg at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. He wrote a 1,000-page book on just hydrotherapy. It was used, as I mentioned, in those sanitariums in the northeast of the United States during the pandemic. And what they would do is they would lay these patients out. They would get towels, dip them in water, heat them up. They would apply it over the body. So that basically they were so hot that they knew the body temperature was rising. They could see sweat coming down off the face. And then quickly cool them down. They had no idea what they were doing, but they knew that it worked. And interestingly, if you look at almost every culture in the world, and I've done this, I've talked to Iranians, I've talked to people in Asia, Africa, they all have a version of this. Sometimes it's in the hot sand, sometimes but they all have an idea that this works. And if you think about it, it seems like it would, because what is the first innate response in our body to a viral infection, generally speaking, especially in children? It's a fever. Mm-hmm. And we know that fever can reduce viral replication, but it does something else that's extremely important. And I wish I had the graph here. I could show you basically a graph showing an increasing temperature as we go across. And then at a specific temperature, at 39 degrees Celsius, they did this experiment. There was a 10-fold increase, and here's the key, a 10-fold increase in something called interferon. Interferon is a protein that the body produces that interferes with viral replication. So, and it's happening at a specific temperature. So this is, I believe, part of what we're doing when we do hydrotherapy. Most viruses, scientists will say, most viruses should easily be able to be taken care of by your immune system. Your immune system is incredibly complex, sophisticated, that thousands of viruses are trying to get into your body all the time. The ones that you know about are the ones that have ways of disabling your immune system. I'll give you an example. SARS-CoV-2 has a protein embedded in it. It's not the spike protein. It's actually one of the nuclear proteins. What it does when it infects the cell is it suppresses the body's ability to signal to make interferon. There was actually a recent study that was done that showed that when you mutated this protein, that instead of when it infects mice and kills all 10 of them, the virus was harmless, because in every single case, the mouse was able to counteract this virus because it was able to make interferon. So it seems as though, and there's many studies on this that confirm this, that SARS-CoV-2, one of the ways it has of producing disease and death is by suppressing your body's ability to make interferon. If you could somehow override that and increase your body's ability to make interferon, you might get an improvement in outcomes. Well, as it turns out, applying heat, hydrotherapy is one of those ways, or a fever is one of those ways of improving by 10-fold interferon secretion. So very early on in the pandemic, when we didn't have any of these treatments, I was telling people, we told it on our MedCram channel as well, is to avoid medications that reduced fever, because I think fever is actually a beneficial thing to have. And not only that, we were also directing them to websites that taught people how to do this hydrotherapy exercise. By the way, again, the same thing that was done in New England, and they had much less rates. Now, I don't have any randomized placebo-controlled trials on hydrotherapy. I wish we did. We desperately need those to show that this is beneficial. But I think the risks of hydrotherapy are pretty low. I mean, there are risks. You could burn someone, right, with hot water. So you've got to be careful about that. But I think this is one of the ways, and it's been tried for a long time, that we can do if we get into a situation where we've contracted a virus. It doesn't matter what kind of virus. As soon as you start to feel ill, this is something that you can do.
Interesting. So what is the most practical way, or is there a resource that people can find out, like to do if they want to do hydrotherapy on their own? Or is like a hot and cold contrast, like doing, going in the sauna for 20 minutes, then going cold plunge for 2 minutes and going back and forth? Is that going to be as beneficial, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it can be. Sometimes, though, in the United States, when they manufacture spas, for instance, if you're doing it that way, they will only go up to 104 degrees. That sometimes it's harder to get someone's body temperature up. By the way, you also have to be very careful when you do this because people can get arrhythmias. People can also faint. So it should be done with somebody watching you. You really ought to be talking to your physician too before you do some of these extreme things. I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. But yeah, so hot and cold is basically all we're doing. There's many ways of heating up someone's body temperature. You can do it in hot, you can do it in a sauna. The recipient of the 1927 Nobel Prize in Medicine, a guy by the name of Joreg, basically what he did was he took malaria, infected his patients with a neurosyphilis. This is before penicillin. The malaria caused such high fevers that the high fevers triggered the immune system, got rid of the neurosyphilis. This is a tried and true technique that they did on patients before we had antibiotics. And that system is still there. We don't use it because we have medications and antibiotics, which are much easier to give than hydrotherapy. But if we're in a situation, let's say there's another pandemic and we don't have a vaccine, we don't have medications that are off-label that we can use, and you're at home and there's no infrastructure, there's no prescriptions, there's no pharmacies, what is it that you could learn to do on yourself if you're in the situation to perhaps give your immune system a better shot at getting over the virus? So one of the good resources that you asked about is a website called Hydro. It's HYDRO, the number 4 for COVID, COVID. There's a physiotherapist in Australia by the name of Bruce Thompson who has gone through all of the literature on how they used to do hydrotherapy and has written a modern protocol. It's spelled out very beautifully on his website, hydroforcovid.com. There is even a letter on there that you can print out and give your physician to ask them if this is okay, what's going on. And they have different protocols. They have a prophylactic protocol, they have a mild COVID protocol, and they have a severe COVID protocol on there. He's done a fabulous job, and I highly recommend looking at that resource for more information.
Amazing. This has been great. I want you to tell people about MedCram. Tell us a little bit about MedCram or anywhere else where people can continue to learn more from you, follow you.
Great, yeah. So we're on Instagram and we're also on Twitter. I guess it's X now. But the two biggest organs of our social media is our YouTube channel, which is just MedCram videos. You'll just type in MedCram, you'll get to our page. And on there, we have a large variety of different topics that we talk about. We talk about COVID, we talk about regular diseases. And then, of course, our major website, which is medcram.com. And on medcram.com, we have a lot of videos on medical topics that are explained clearly. Some of them are actually offering continuing medical education for healthcare providers who need that healthcare education, and they get credits. But it's not exclusively for just healthcare providers. And we have some videos that are behind paywalls. Most of them are not. So we invite you to come and check us out at medcram.com.
Amazing. Well, this has been really great, really, really great information. Thank you for sharing. And definitely highly recommend people check out MedCram, and congrats on having over 1 million YouTube subscribers. That's really incredible. So thank you for joining us, and I hope we could do it again soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Talor.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.